Hey guys, it's me cyoubx, and in this video I'm going to give you some tips on achieving sub-1 on 4x4 using the Yao method. If you're someone who uses reduction, you probably should not watch this video because I don't think it'll help you very much. Similarly, if you're not very good at Yao, or if you're just not very familiar with the method, I would also not watch this video because I am assuming you have a pretty good understanding of the method already, and there are just a few simple things that are keeping you away from getting sub-1. This tutorial is set up in a very unique way. What you're watching right now is a 46-second solve. After this solve completes, we're going to be taking a look at the solve again 2 more times. First, I'm going to go over all the good things about this solve, things that maybe you aren't doing to help you achieve sub-1. But after that, we're going to go over the bad things about this solve. Because even though this is sub-1, and in fact it's sub-50, there are still many things that I can improve on in this solve. And the idea here is, even once you do achieve sub-1, there are still things that you can improve on, and hopefully this tutorial will help you with that. So now that the solve is completed, let's go on to the next part where I talk about the good things about the solve. Before inspection even starts, let's talk about the choice of cube. People like to say it's the cube or not the cube, but I've never been a strong believer of that because, especially for 4x4, that's just not true. I think both are equally important, and in some cases the cube might be even more important than the cuber. If you've ever used a Rubik's store-bought 4x4 before, you know how difficult it is to get good times, let alone getting sub-1. The cube I'm using in the video is a ShengXiao 4x4 version 3. It has been modified, but that doesn't mean you have to modify yours. In general, I do recommend the ShengXiao 4x4 because it is really cheap, and even if you don't modify, you can get really good times. In fact, the fastest people in the world don't use modified ShengXiao 4x4s, and they are clearly very fast. Inspection is a huge part of getting sub-1, especially if you're going to be doing this competitively. You know you have 15 seconds to look for pieces. Generally speaking, you always want to find the first center at least, and then if you can start planning out the second center, that would be better. Each center only has 4 pieces, so looking for the first center isn't really any more difficult than planning out your cross on 3x3, so if you can do it for 3x3, you shouldn't have any issues for 4x4 since you are just looking for 4 pieces. Also notice that during inspection I noticed there was a yellow bar and a white bar. The general rule is to just go for one of them but preserve the other. So as you saw right there, I essentially did 2 centers at once, and it's not very difficult to do. If you think about center building for what it is, there are only so many cases, and in order to pair different center pieces together more efficiently, all it is combining different cases for building centers in order to create better ones for yourself. It's not a very difficult thing to do, but the best way to practice this is probably to just take away the timer and just do a solve and think about how to do things more efficiently. In the long run, that's going to help you a lot, and it's something that I highly recommend doing. As you can see right there, I just completed the first cross edge, and there wasn't a huge pause between the second center and the first cross edge. And something that you'll notice in this entire solve is that transitions are really important. A lot of times people can't get sub-1 on 4x4 simply because they pause a ton between the substeps. And a really easy way to get rid of those pauses is by looking ahead. And it's really not as difficult as it sounds. The way I think about look ahead for Yao is basically turn as quickly as you can during the beginning of the substep, but as you get near the end of the substep, so in this case the second center, slow down a little bit so that you can look ahead into the next part of the solve. Now part of look ahead of course is finding the pieces first, and for a lot of people you have difficulty finding the pieces. For me, finding pieces has always been sort of easy, mostly because for cross edges I always do the white edges because I'm not color neutral, and my eyes are just used to seeing white pieces since I do it on 3x3 as well. So on Yao, I basically block out everything that is not white, and so that only limits me to 8 pieces, and then I only have to pair 2 of them. So it's really very easy for me to recognize the pieces during the second center and just lead straight into the first 3 cross edges. You'll notice a couple things that just happened there as I finished the cross edges. The first is I primarily built the cross on the bottom. Now faster people like to do it on the left, and a lot of people have taken that as convention, as something that you should do. But one thing that I really want to recommend to you guys is to think about Yao for what it is. It's really just a list of substeps, and if you can complete those substeps, that's all that really matters. There's no real right or wrong way to hold the cube, and I recommend you find something that works best for you. For instance, I can do the cross on left, however, I don't know the color scheme very well in that orientation, and I'm not very comfortable with it. So it's much more intuitive for me to do the cross on bottom since I do that on 3x3. Additionally, after you do finish the first two centers, it's very likely that your centers are going to be on the top and bottom, and so it just makes sense to leave the cube in that orientation and start doing the cross edges. One thing I do want to point out though is when I was inserting that third cross edge, you'll notice I actually rotated the cube. This is so that I could have a better orientation and a better transition into the last four centers. What you just saw right there was not pretty, and I will go over that in the next section of this video when I talk about the bad things, but there was something good about doing all those cube rotations that I just did. Generally what I like to do after the first three cross edges is just take a look at the four remaining centers and see what's already built and see what's easy. You'll often notice that there are already 2x1 bars completed. One thing that I really like to do is to just look at the four centers and look at the 2x1 bars that are already pre-built and align them on the left side of the cube. This is not only a great organizational tool, it actually helps me know where the pieces are so that when I actually do start building those centers, I know where everything is and it's just much easier. So you'll notice that as I do these centers, there aren't very many pauses. You'll notice that after I finished the last two centers, I went directly into the fourth cross edge without much of a pause, and that has to do with deduction. Remember when you do the first three cross edges, you only have one cross edge remaining. So after the last two centers, any edges that you see that are white have to be the ones that you want next. This makes recognition really easy. Like I said, white is something that stands out to me, so once I saw those two white stickers, I knew that that was what I needed for the last cross edge, and so transitioning between the two steps was really simple. You'll notice here that the edge pairing was pretty smooth. Generally speaking, I do a better job, but I thought this was a good demonstration of how choppy edge pairing is still fine. There were plenty of pauses here that I could have cut out, but you'll notice that the edge pairing was still pretty fast, and that has everything to do with 323 being an amazing method for edge pairing. It seemed like I was doing a lot of cube rotations, but in actuality, I wasn't. The reason I did the cube rotations at all was so that I could insert the edge pieces into the middle layer more easily. I could have done the same thing without cube rotations, but I like RUR prime better than Sledgehammer for inserting edge pieces into the middle layer, so I opted for the cube rotations instead. As I was doing that last slice back, I was already looking ahead for my first F2L pair, and so there was a pretty seamless transition between edge pairing and the first F2L pair, and that's something that you really want to work on. After a while, you'll notice that a lot of the steps of Yao are very repetitive, and they typically end in the same set of moves, so muscle memory is going to take over pretty quickly, and what that means is really easy look ahead. Your hands will know exactly what to do, and so you don't actually have to look at the pieces that you're solving as you complete the substep. Instead, what you can do is you can use your eyes and start looking for the next substep pieces, and that's going to really help you cut down on those pauses when you transition between substeps. The 3x3 stage here was pretty good. There were a few lockups, but that has everything to do with my turn accuracy. One thing I do want to point out though is if you do get something like parity, you want to make sure that you can recognize that you have parity very quickly, and you also want to be able to execute those types of things very quickly as well. And 3x3 as a whole, of course if you're not very good at 3x3, you're not going to get sub 1 on 4x4 anytime soon. So even though in this video I'm not giving any tips on 3x3, it is important that you are good at it so that you have a shot at getting sub 1 on 4x4. So those were some of the really good things about this solve. What we're going to do now is take a look at the solve again, but I'm going to be talking about things that aren't very good about the solve. So now we're going to take a look at some of the bad things about this solve, and a lot of these bad things happen to be a lot of the good things that I talked about previously, but they're things that I can still improve on, and hopefully this video will help a lot of you who are already sub 1 and are looking for more things to improve on. Previously I talked about how important inspection was. Ironically, I didn't do a very good job. I didn't use the entire 15 seconds. I probably should have used the entire 15 seconds in order to build the first two centers more efficiently than I did. So like I said, the centers weren't bad, but of course, had I used longer inspection, I probably could have done these centers in a much more efficient way. And even though these centers did seem pretty good, it's these little changes in your solves that are really going to make a big difference in the long run, because once you get something like sub 1, I would consider you to be intermediate, and at that point, there aren't very many big things that you can do to help your solves. It's a lot of these tiny things that you do, and they really do add up. Previously, I did talk about how the transition between the first two centers and the first cross edge was pretty seamless, but as you can see, there was clearly a pause there, and it's these little pauses that really make a big difference in your solve and make them really slow. So any pauses are bad pauses, and you want to make sure that you can cut them out. And so even for my own solves, this is something that I'm constantly working on, is just cutting out the pauses between the transitions of substeps. I do like building the first three cross edges on the bottom or the top, but of course there is a reason why faster people do it on the left. It's because it transitions more easily into the last four centers. And for someone who's trying to achieve sub 1, that doesn't matter very much. But in the long run, it's probably something that you want to try out because I do think it's a little bit more efficient. Of course, what I did here is perfectly acceptable for the purpose of this video, but again, like I said, it's these little fixes that are going to make a bigger difference in your times. I talked about how the cube rotations weren't so bad because I was looking at the pieces that I already had completed and priming them. However, doing cube rotations like that is a waste of time and it does look quite foolish. So I would say in general, if you can just start building centers immediately, that is ideal. You don't have to look at all the pieces you have. Of course, this is a personal choice, and I'm not saying one way is better than the other, but it's something that you just need to figure out for yourself. If you can cut out cube rotations, then that's ideal. Even though the edge pairing was pretty fast, there are a lot of things that I could have done to make this so much faster. One of them is, if you'll notice the way I was turning the cube, it was very choppy. It was a lot of bursts of faster turn speed and then just pauses in between everywhere. Again, like I said, you want to cut out those pauses, and it's not very difficult to do. You can just look ahead for the edges, and 3-2-3 really helps with the look ahead. So I actually could have done this edge pairing much faster. I would say that this was a pretty decent 3x3 stage, but of course 3x3 can always be improved on, and so of course this can also be improved. As you probably noticed in this process, I was pretty critical on my own solves, and I paused every few seconds because there were so many things that were either good or bad, and it's really these bad things that you point out that are really going to improve your times. So one thing that I would recommend you do is actually film your own solves and look at the issues that you have and work on those. Sometimes when you do a solve in real time, you don't notice the pauses that you're actually making, and if you can film yourself and look back at it, that's going to be a really good way for you to actually critique yourself and therefore improve. Hopefully this video helped you. Again, the main takeaways are, of course, to cut out the pauses as much as possible, and a really good way to actually practice that is by filming your own solves so that you can see for yourself how many pauses you're making and then attack those pauses and try to get rid of them. So thank you all for watching. Until next time, toodles.